Hey, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. Today we are going to finish our dive into the Scott and Lacey Peterson story. We're going to go over the court case, the different information that came out during trial, and the different arguments and theories of what actually happened that day, all the way up until where the case stands today. So let's get into it.
But to judge what is necessary to be told, it is necessary to see and hear all that is to be seen and heard.
All right. Now, in our last part, we left off with the bodies of Lacey and Connor being found, and then Scott being arrested 4 days later when DNA confirmed that yes, it was Connor and yes, it was Lacey. Baby Connor was found with no clothing on. There was something over his ear that had like folded it over and then left like a weird colored stain on him. The defense pointed at this and they made a big deal about this, indicating that it had to have been duct tape that had been placed over his ear and couldn't have just gotten there naturally. Now, because the medical examiner didn't keep whatever had held down Connor's ear, there's disputes between the defense and the prosecutors on what exactly had been over Connor's ear. All right. The defense insisted that it had to be black electrical tape or some kind of electrical tape that kept his ear down and left like a residue, leaving behind a color on him. The prosecution pushed the idea that it was actually kelp, and the iodine from the kelp is what changed the color of Connor's skin in the part that it was held onto. Now, while they were able to get the weight of Connor at 2.5 pounds, there was issues with some of the other measurements that they were able to do. For example, like there were a lot of organs that had already gotten to the point of decomposition where you're not able to weigh them individually. They get liquefied and there's nothing that you can gather from it at that point other than the body has not been alive for a while. So, wasn't much use in that. There was a tear in his shoulder, and then there was this piece of like twine. It's like the only thing that they kept when they did the autopsy on him. And this twine is there are pictures out there of it, and it's like wrapped around his neck and his shoulder. But the way that it's tied also ends up causing some controversy. So the defense points at the tie on Connor's neck and they say, hey, listen, the whole reason why this tie is on his neck like this is because somebody did it afterward. There's no way for it to have just slipped over him in the bay, so that's not really a possibility. It would have had to happen pretty quickly just based on the timeline of everything. And, we'll get to Lacey in a second and it will make a little bit more sense. So just bear with me on this. Now, the defense insisted with that tape being placed over his ear and then that twine-like material being wrapped around him and in a way that wouldn't have happened naturally in the bay, that at some point Connor must have been handled outside of Lacey's womb. So their theory, of course, is there you go. That's what happened to Lacey. Somebody took the baby and it couldn't have been Scott. So there you go. The prosecution, they didn't let this phase them. They had, the mindset of the kelp being over the ear, and then the way that they explained that tie was that the water just ended up washing it over him in a way. It was like a natural thing. It could have happened just because of bay tides and how he ended up getting out of Lacey. So we know Lacey was found the day after Connor, and the idea behind this from the prosecution is pretty simple. Now, it has to do with the way that Lacey's body was found. She did not have her head, she did not have her arms, she was missing a foot, and she was missing, like, higher up on her leg for her other leg, and her chest cavity was open. Now, on her ribs, there were barnacles attached to it, and, like, all of her organs were missing except for her uterus. And there was a tear in the top of the uterus where Connor must have gotten out. Now, they pushed this idea because of the simple fact that Lacey had still been wearing pants. Like they found her body in some khaki pants, khaki maternity pants, and there was like duct tape on her crotch for some reason. I wonder if it could have something to do with maybe wanting to like keep any decomposition inside of her. That's so when a body starts decomposing, there's some liquefaction stuff that happens. It's gross, okay? The human body's gross, all right? And when that happens, like a mortician will go in and they will stuff different areas of bodies with like cotton to try and make sure that there's not leakage and you know the body stays all together. Well, that's what I think of when I think of like why the duct tape would be there, and I feel like whoever had done that, if it had, in fact been done by somebody, I mean that I could see that happening. The other idea about the duct tape is it doesn't really matter, that it was just more of something that just got put on her. I don't know, like what happened with Connor. So to me, that makes sense that the tape was intentionally placed on her. Along with all of that, her cervix being intact, there was no sign that she had had a vaginal birth at all. All right. Now, they push a little bit more on this and they talk about the experts in the case, the medical examiners, they come in and they talk about the way that the opening in the uterus was, that it didn't look like something that had been man made. But I just wonder about, I don't know, it's amazing to me that they can tell these things just just because of the level of decomposition. You know what I mean? If there was so much missing, how could they tell exactly where it had been cut? Maybe wildlife had fed on it. Those are just some of the questions I have. Like I would be really curious to know how can they tell the difference, but apparently they can, and that was, what the prosecution had determined based on the experts that had examined Lacey. I suppose there's always like a margin of error there, but it's another one of those things where it's like just the state that Connor was in when he was found, it's just crazy to me to know that a current could do something like that. It's one of those things that I just wish there was more solid, definite answer. And I wish that the medical examiner had kept that thing that was over Connor's ear, because it would be really nice to have testing on that and know for sure. But this case doesn't really have like forensics like that. We talked about it before. The FBI had gone into the house. There was no blood splatter. They didn't find anything like that in the house. They used special vacuums and they concentrated on areas that Scott had been. So it's just, this case is just crazy. And I think this really goes into why we still talk about it today and why it is where it's at, It always feels like there's just one thing that you need to make you feel solidly one side or the other. Or at least that's kind of how I feel. And everybody has an answer for everything, apparently. So I don't know. There was a forensic anthropologist that had also examined Lacey, and here's another thing. There's not like a definitive timeline that they can give on how long Lacey was in the bay. The best that we get from the forensic anthropologist is that Lacey had been in the bay for somewhere between 3 and 6 months, which, okay, that is a huge window, especially when you start looking into the different theories. And, with such a large window, there's so many different things that can apply. So, it's another one of those frustrating details. This case is full of them. Now, leading up to Scott's arrest, he had already been followed like for months. The police had a trail on him, but he also had been like hounded by media and his life just fell apart. Okay. The defense tries to talk about him living out of his car. He couldn't go home anymore because of the media surrounding it, and it was a nightmare for him. That's kind of the excuse that they give when he's found with all this crazy shit in his car, okay? I mean, we are talking clothes for days, all different kinds of shoes. He had $15,000 cash. He had a snorkel. He had an axe. He had like camping gear, a tent, you know. So the camping gear, that's explained away by the defense that, oh, well, Scott just had happened to buy $300 worth of camping equipment, and because he lived out of his car, there wasn't anywhere for him to put it, and he just had it in the car. He also had a bunch of flyers, missing flyers for Lacey. He had a really cute picture of them together. There were three little books that the books were like kids' books, like Spot's Play Day or something like that. And he had three of the same little book. He was going to give it to his nieces and nephews later on. I don't know. There was Easter coming up and he had planned on giving them the books. He also had like different knives on him. He had a map to Amber's work, and that's concerning. There was a letter that Amber had written to him that he had in the car, and he had all these different cards, like credit cards. He had one that belonged to his mom, and then the others, I think they were like his and his businesses. But he also had his brother's ID, all right? The excuse for having the ID is that he just really wanted a discount on the golf day that he had planned with his dad and his brother that day. It wasn't the same brother, it was a different brother, but I guess his address gave him some kind of discount at the Torrey Pines golf course that Scott had been planning to go golfing with his dad and his brother that day, his other brother. When he had gone, he supposedly had thought the media was following him, so he led whoever, the investigators that were tailing him, he was doing circles around the city trying to shake them off of his tail, and it was that combined with everything that he had in his car at the time, that made the prosecution think, well, oh, he's trying to run. But no, the defense still insisted, no, he wasn't trying to run. He actually had gone to a business trip in Mexico at some point between when Lacey went missing and when he was arrested, and he came back, and they point to the kids' books and they say, hey, look, he has these books for his nieces and nephews and Easter. So he had plans later on. There was no risk of him running away, basically, is what they were saying. Now, Scott, his appearance also had changed. The defense says, well, it's gradual changes over time. And okay, look at the picture of Scott. Look at him. All right. Look at that hair. There's some kind of mention somewhere where Scott tries to play off that his hair had gotten naturally lightened in a friend's pool. Just a small mention of it. Scott never went on the stand during the trial, so there wasn't any like questioning of him on that. But just the concept of that is ridiculous. I grew up swimming all summer long. Okay. I have pretty dark hair. Scott's hair was darker than mine, even though there was never a time that my hair got bleached like that without any kind of intent. Okay. The bleach job, too, it's so bad. Okay. There's no tone to it. It's just, is orange. It's that really shitty looking bleach job that everybody dreads having. I mean, unless you want the orange color like that, some people can really play it off, but yeah, no, his hair was atrocious and his beard had been dyed the same color. It was like a more like a little goatee that he had going, different from the fresh-faced grieving husband that was like distant, much different than that when he was arrested. And it kind of shocked everybody to see that picture. I mean, Scott had been doing his best to lay low. He had done some TV interviews, but since then, he had facial hair grow out. He had lost weight. His hair had been that awful, awful color. He looked like a different person. And really, a lot of people saw that and they said, well, look, he's also trying to hide who he is. One of the biggest things for a lot of people in this is that $15,000 in cash that he had. Now, the way that this is explained by the defense is that, well, yeah, he had that money, but here's what happened. His mother had actually gone to withdraw money from a bank account, but forgot her card. So she gave the bank teller her information, and they had pulled up a bank account that she was on. But this bank account actually had been Scott's. Scott had opened it in 1991 and had his mother on it. He ended up eventually having it be a joint account with him and Lacey and forgot to take his mom off. So her pulling that several thousand dollars, almost $15,000 out, her taking all of that money, she replaced it with cash to Scott. Now there's a whole bunch of talk about the cash going around at that time, and I mean the Mercedes that he was driving was actually in her name. There so the defense goes into, Scott had his truck taken away, and the truck really was more about his livelihood. He had to be able to cart around the fertilizer. When that happened and he had no vehicle left, he had to kind of figure something out. He had to get out of the payments, and he was just looking to get a car that he could just drive around, pay cash for, drive around, and, not be as tied to anything because, he also lost his job. So it was an awful time. Just terrible. Okay. For the people who really strongly believe that he is 100% guilty, you probably feel pretty good about that. For people who don't think that he was guilty, you know, it's really just a tragic thing to see. I think for somebody who's more in the middle, it's unfortunate. It is. Really, when it comes down to it, that's what's going to happen. I mean, that's what's going to happen when you have somebody who has a mob on them. And that's kind of what happened with Scott. Let's be honest, and I think it was, there was the OJ case before, but this case just had so much more. And I think everybody just really fell in love with Lacey just by looking at her picture. She's so sweet and kind. Like you look at her and you want to be friends with her, and Amber notched it up to a whole nother degree when she came out and really added that extra layer of spiciness to the whole story. Scott was also found with like 200 sleeping pills, 10 Viagra pills. He had a handgun on him. I mean, there was so much in the car. Like I said, you think it's done, but then it just keeps going. So, I mean, just so much shit, okay? I'm almost impressed with how much he got to fit in that car. So, the prosecution calls this a common sense case. They take all of the circumstantial evidence against Scott and they come up with their theory. Their theory is that on December 23rd, sometime after Lacey had gotten off of the phone with her mother, that Scott had murdered Lacey. Maybe they got into a fight. Maybe she found out about Amber and that was it. If you believe this, you also may even believe that he had just planned on doing it that day regardless. They say that he had packed her body in the truck, taken her to the Berkeley Marina, and disposed of her body in the bay using 4 concrete anchors to tie her down into the bay until that storm that shook her body loose, let Connor escape from Lacey's uterus, and eventually washed them both above the shore. So the prosecutors also got a perinatal radiologist that had put Connor's death, based on measurements of different bones, had put Connor's death somewhere between December 23rd and December 25th. So there's also a 3-day margin of error, and that would put the time frame anywhere between December 20th and December 28th. The defense pushes against this. They point to, the robbery that had happened at the Medinas, and, no, it had to be someone like that because Scott had left. He had gone to the Berkeley Marina. There were witnesses that had insisted that they had seen Lacey. I think the most intriguing of this has to do with the mailman and the neighbor, Karen, who had put Mackenzie back in the yard. So they both kind of have time-stamped pieces of information that they were able to give about like what was going on around that time. Scott and Lacey's neighbor, who had put Mackenzie back in the backyard, had timed it at 10:18. Now she knew the time because she had receipts from the store that she had just gone to, so she was very solid and very confident in that fact. Just real quick, there's a lot of issues with how the information was shared at this time. You have hard copies of everything. There wasn't as much digital stuff going on at the time. So it's a lot different than today where we just go, "Hey, share the data, share the information." Now, there's also less information because it's not like everybody has a smartphone in their hand. This whole issue of sharing information made it to where there was some documentation from a mailman that had gone missing. This documentation had been put in some papers that just, with the volume of evidence that was there and the amount that had to be shared throughout the trial and everything, it was missed. Now, the mailman that normally went to their house every day, he made really good notes. He had stopped by the Peterson house about 25 minutes after the neighbor had put Mackenzie into the yard, and he didn't hear Mackenzie bark. All right. And this was very odd because every day when he would go to the Peterson house, he would hear Mackenzie bark. He also had noted that the gate was open. Now, here's the thing. If it is 25 minutes afterward, 25 minutes after Mackenzie had already been put into the backyard, then how? How is it that Mackenzie wasn't at the house barking at him? He had noted that Mackenzie barked at him no matter where he was at the time. So he could be anywhere in the house and the mailman would hear him bark. So how is it that he doesn't? It just doesn't make sense. Where was Mackenzie at that time? And this is notes from the mailman before anybody even knew that Lacey was missing. So there's issues with witnesses in the trial. The people who had spotted Lacey Peterson had kind of just been disregarded. They weren't followed up with the way that a lot of people feel like they should have been. The whole van situation, that's thrown out the window because, according to the prosecution, there's no way the robbery at the Medina's house had happened on December 24th. They continue to insist that that robbery happened on the 26th. But here's the thing. Somebody had to have gotten a hold of some watches that Lacey had been wearing because there were a couple of appearances at pawn shops of watches that matched the description of watches that Scott said Lacey had that were missing. All right. These were watches that had been passed on to her by her grandmother. And how do these watches just end up at the pawn shops? See, it's crazy. It's weird. I guess Scott could have always just given them away to some transient in the area, but it's interesting. I feel like that would take a lot more planning, and I don't know that Scott is actually that smart. You know what I mean? I don't feel like he would be smart enough to be like, yeah, let's plant these watches for somebody to go and try and pawn. Scott's trial lasted for quite some time. We're talking June 1st through November 3rd. It was huge. It took so long. There were arguments all throughout it, and of course, I mean, of course there would be. We're looking at a case that has the death penalty. The accusations, though, that come out about what happened with the jury, that's really difficult to handle. The drama in the jury room just added to how crazy this went. When they go off for deliberations, they had actually picked a very intelligent man to lead it. He was going to be the jury foreman. I think he was a lawyer and a doctor, and he wanted to go through everything. He was very meticulous and he had taken great notes, and everybody else just kind of was like, "Are you serious? Like, he's obviously guilty. What are you doing? Why are we doing this?" They were all ready to go, and he wasn't. Now they're doing their deliberations in the room back there, and at some point, one of the jury members comes up to him and starts saying, "Hey, I followed up on this thing. I looked it up online." And as soon as he heard that, he was like, "Nope." Took that person to the judge, had the judge remove that person from the jury panel. Once this juror that had looked up information about the case online had been removed, a new juror was put in their place. And this was Rochelle Nice. Now, she causes one of the biggest upsets to people who are, you know, believers in Scott's guilt. Okay. She lied on the juror form. And this form later on down the line actually is part of the reason why Scott got his murder sentence taken away and moved to life, because she lied on the form. Now, there's also issues with the jury in general where they were getting rid of any jurors that did not feel that that did not believe in the death penalty or whatever it may be, because they didn't believe that they would be able to go for the death penalty if that's the case. But really, jurors should not be discredited from being able to be a juror, disqualified. Jurors should not be disqualified for that. So with Rochelle Nice joining the jury, they had to pick a new foreman and just basically start all over again. Okay. But the original foreman, he wasn't into it. He was kind of, I don't know, the way he puts it is like he kind of was being bullied or whatever by the people. Yeah, he was out of there. He was done. He leaves and then the jury takes over, and it's okay. I understand that jurors go sometimes and they go and they talk to the media afterward. I mean, we have that happening nowadays too. But the way that they did it was so gross. It's like there's a clip of a few of the jurors out there talking and doing like a celebration after the fact. And they're like, "Yeah, it's legal to kill your wife in California." Something like that. It's the way that it comes off is gross. It's like they're celebrating all of it. And it's like,
He is a jerk, and I have one comment for Scott. You look somebody in the face when they're talking to you.
If you watch the juror called Strawberry Shortcake, and you watch her after, and you watch her call him a vulgar name.
It was just another day in paradise for Scott, another day that he had to go through emotions. But he's on his way home, Scott figured.
I thought, my Lord, you're a juror, and you just condemned a man to death? And you get up there and say those type of things? That just showed me that it was emotionally charged.
Well, guess what, Scotty?
San Quentin's your new home.
And it's illegal to kill your wife and child in California.
2 weeks after his pregnant wife disappeared, Scott Peterson ordered the Playboy channel on his satellite system. 4 days later, he orders 2 hardcore pornography channels.
That just told me that she was never coming home. He had a sexual addiction. I mean, there was porn found, and the stuff that he ordered from cable was strictly porn. It wasn't hard R. And Lacey was pretty much a conservative woman who, wasn't into that. Knowing that his wife would never accept that is like, she's never coming home. I'm gonna do the things that I want to do now.
If you had a chance to talk with Scott Peterson, what would you ask?
I guess my question to Scott would be that, Scott, do you miss the Dish Network?
Yeah, with the mystery of the living room. Oh, God. That was...
And if so, what movie would you select?
What do you say to that? Is that based on logic? Is that based on a rational person's thinking? Or is that just emotion, vitriol, hate, and let's get him?
I get that we want to have justice like that, but it sounds like they had more emotion behind it, especially Rochelle Nice. And the whole issue with her is that basically she had said no, there was no issue with her before with any kind of domestic violence or anything like that. But it turns out that she actually had a restraining order against her ex because, I don't know, something with the girlfriend. It was a domestic violence case and she had been scared for her life too. So she kind of really clung to Lacey and Connor and, it's like she identified with them. And that's the exact reason why they ask these questions on the juror polls. They want a whole jury selection of people who are going to be fair, neutral, and listen to the facts as they're presented. And there is some argument about her being too much into her feelings in it. Wasn't enough to have the case overturned or anything, but yeah, like I said, I mean, he went from death row to just a life sentence. Now, along with this just being a very public case, there's a lot of different theories out there that have kind of been born with different pieces of information that has like come out. One of the big things for me is the missing pregnant women in the area. Within like an 80-mile radius, there were 7 pregnant women that went missing between 1999 and 2002 when Lacey went missing. They weren't really given as much airtime, okay? 3 of them were in Modesto. The other 4 were like within 80 miles. And one of the stories that really is talked about, I mean, I didn't have names for the other pregnant women. I didn't find all that, but I did find Evelyn Hernandez, and her story just breaks my heart. Real quick, I mean, she had been an immigrant from El Salvador, and she had a son named Alex. She had been very pregnant at the time, 8 or 9 months pregnant, and the dad wasn't involved. He actually had been married to someone else, and she was not interested in trying to continue anything with him. It was apparent to her that he wasn't leaving his wife, so she's got her 5-year-old son, Alex, and she's working a few different jobs. She has some kind of disability check too that she gets, and, living her life as normal, and she goes missing, okay? Her and her son, Alex. Very pregnant woman, little boy, missing. She ends up getting found in a manner really similar to Lacey. The only thing is that her baby hadn't been found. Her baby, wherever the baby was, lost in the bay somewhere, okay? She also had been found missing her limbs, missing her head, and Alex was never found. It's suspicious, right? I mean, some people have come out saying that it's like a satanic ring going around stealing pregnant women and doing whatever sacrifices of newborns. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying my eyebrows get raised when we're talking 7 pregnant women going missing like that, especially when one is found very similarly to how Lacey was found. Along with that satanic theory, there's also, of course, the burglary across the street. There's a theory out there that Lacey had come back from walking Mackenzie. She had went to check her mail, but then noticed that there were men out there at her neighbor's house and robbing it. And she went and she said something. I mean, Lacey wasn't quiet about this kind of stuff. Lacey was very actively protective of her neighborhood. She was part of like a neighborhood watch. She took it very seriously and she wanted a safe, good neighborhood to raise her son in. It's pointed to her being kind of a spitfire, and that would be the alternative theory. The thing that frustrates me about that one, and like that one, more so that one being discredited, is it's hard for me to buy into the robbery actually happening on the 26th. That's just a difficult one for me. Having that reporter there early in the morning, I know that people like move around the time or whatever to try and make it fit, but it doesn't sit well with me, you know? Now, in the very beginning of this series, I had talked about how the LA Innocence Project had taken this one on and it was a big thing in the news. It still is right now. I mean, in fact, I'll have to come back and update once we get more information, especially if he gets a retrial, because at this point, the evidence that they have that they really want retested is blood, possible blood that was left on a mattress. So December 25th of 2002, there actually was a fire investigator that had worked with the city, and this fire investigator had been investigating a burnt out van that had been found December 25th, 2002, about 2 miles away, a mile, 2 miles, something like that, really close to the Peterson home and where Laci had gone missing. And in the back of this orange van that had been burnt out, there was a piece of a mattress. Now, this survived the fire. Really, it looks because it was soaked in something, and what they're thinking it was soaked in was blood.
The Innocence Project also asking for more extensive DNA testing of a piece of fabric found in a burnt-out van a mile away, the day after Laci's disappearance.
That orange van had actually been seen where one of the witnesses saw Laci, so there was a connection between the van and a possible Laci sighting.
So somebody's blood is on a mattress in the back of a van that was burned deliberately. Who?
Now they're pushing to have this tested. They're pushing to have the DNA tested to see if it is Laci. And, you know, if it is, that's going to blow everything up. There's no way that Scott could have done it. I mean, so I did hear a legal expert talking about this case and, you know, reporting on the whole LA Innocence Project situation. And they go, oh, well, maybe Scott had somebody else do it and hired somebody to do it. I guess that's how it could work, but that's, again, stretching it so far. I mean, he already was convicted with no forensic evidence, and it's a little bit frustrating to see. I feel like the police should have done a more thorough search. They shouldn't have zeroed in on him, regardless of whether he was the person or not. Investigating all of these different avenues, especially a van that was found burnt out with blood in it. Come on. That could have been easily resolved. This wouldn't be an issue today if that had been taken care of back then. It's like doing a half-assed job. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh here saying that they're doing a half-assed job. It seems like common sense to me. You hear about reports of a van in the area. You find a burnt out van. There's possible blood stains. I want to look a little bit closer at that, okay? Even if I want to go after the husband because he's such an unlikable prick, right? I still want to know. Like, you can be an asshole and not murder your wife and your unborn child. I'm just saying. All right, so what do I think after all of the research I did and all these videos getting put together and just years of following this case since it was a thing? I don't think that there was enough evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. I just don't. I want to see forensics, and maybe it's just a product of, you know, I mean, we're in 2024 now. We're used to seeing so much genetic information. We're used to seeing more solid proof, and I expected more. I expected maybe a drop of blood here or a drop of blood there, but I mean, you only have Scott's one drop of blood on the door of his car that he had told everybody that they would find. I would hope that there would be, you know, some kind of something more. You know, if he transported her in his truck, where's the evidence? If he had her in his boat, where's the evidence? I also don't feel like there's enough to say he's completely innocent either. The way that it's supposed to work is that you have to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, between the van, between the lack of forensics, between all of the different witnesses that really insist that they saw her, between everything that happened, I guess, you know, I'd say with the mailman, but that wasn't really brought up in the court case, it was one of those details that had gotten lost in the shuffle of paperwork. I just don't feel like there was enough to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. But do I believe there's a chance he could have done it? Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think there's a chance for anything to have happened. I just don't think that the prosecution had a strong enough case to actually pull it against him. I think that they used their work with the media in their advantage. One of the things that a lot of people get stuck on with this one is, well, if he didn't do it, why are their bodies in the bay? Now, the whole reason that anybody who believes that Scott is innocent gives is their bodies were placed there. I don't know much about how things wash up on the shore, just to be completely honest with you. I've seen a lot of people insist that the bodies were placed there by whoever had done this, but knowing that there's barnacles on Lacey, it points to her being in there for a lot longer than just being placed there. She had to have been in the water. So what happened with that? I mean, maybe they did dump her in the water like that. The bay was getting also a lot of attention itself. Remember, the police were there, they were searching, they were trying their best to find her. So what a mess. Okay, this whole thing is a mess, and I'm going to be really interested to see how it goes moving forward. I don't feel like we're at beyond a reasonable doubt with it. I think that there's plenty of reasonable doubt that has been brought up, and I guess we'll see how it unfolds. Until then, I really appreciate your support. This was a really fun series to do. I'll update us all as it goes on, with whatever crazy things happen, because it's Scott Peterson, and of course, why wouldn't crazy things happen? So we'll do updates. Other than that, I'm excited to get to a new case. I really look forward to posting that one for you guys too. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.